Before I read our gospel this morning, I would like to remind you that the women of the choir are not here today. They are in Louisville at Jeffersontown Christian Church. They're there with Carl. They're making music at this very moment. This is the weekend of the women's retreat. We miss them here, but we bless them there. I also think that there are some milestones that should be recognized. This week, Monty and Brooks Talley celebrated their 61st wedding anniversary. I'm just hoping to get to 61 years of age. Don't I wish? Our gospel reading this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" The lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." He drew a circle that shut me in, shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had wit to win. I drew a circle that took him in. A poem called Outwitted by Edwin Markham. I feel certain you've heard it before. Jesus was a master storyteller, and he knew the power of story and the way that it could make a point. As I read the stories of his ministry, I often wonder why his questioners keep coming back for more. Didn't the word get around that they were never going to be able to stump him, to catch him, to fool him? I feel certain that for a while there was always somebody who, thinking they were smarter than Jesus, stepped up to take him on. But the more he confounded the brightest and the best of his day, there should have been fewer and fewer coming, willing to put their reputation on the line. Today, it's a lawyer. I imagine that it is very similar today as to it was then. You don't get to be a lawyer unless you have some smarts. Just passing the LSAT is difficult enough. But then you have to have class after class, studying case after case, those things you need to master. It takes a certain kind of person to be a lawyer. If you're going to stand before a judge and jury and present a case, you need to be confident, perhaps even confident borrowing on arrogant. If not, you will never be a successful lawyer. I imagine that while our lawyer was in law school, and I remind you it would have been rabbinical law school, that the question of eternal life would have been one of those most popular cases which they studied. The Pharisees would take the affirmative. The Sadducees would take the negative. The Pharisees believed in resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees believed when you're dead, you're dead. So the lawyer asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" He should have known that it was going to be trouble when Jesus, declining to answer directly, gets him to give the book answer himself. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your strength, all your soul, and all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He should have just turned around and gone home. But instead he goes on asking Jesus, "Who then is my neighbor?" Like Abraham Lincoln, of whom Stephen Douglas said, "Every one of his stories seems like a whack on my back. When he begins to tell a story, I feel that I am overmatched." Jesus had the lawyer right where he wanted him. Like Lincoln, who started those stories with the familiar line, "That reminds me," Jesus begins, "There was a man. There was a man who had 2 sons. There was a man whose name was Nicodemus. There was a man going to Jericho from Jerusalem." I imagine that the crowd was hanging on each and every one of Jesus' words. That's the way it is with good storytelling. You listen intently, afraid that if you miss one word, you might miss something important. I'm sure that as soon as he said the word priest, that people began nodding, their heads thinking, this is really going to be good. But none of them expected the priest to actually cross over to the other side of the road. Weren't priests in the business of helping? Shouldn't he have rushed towards the injured man rather than rush away? Their nodding heads were speaking loudly, even if no one spoke a word. When Jesus says a Levite was next, they were certain a Levite would lend a hand. They knew that the Levites assisted the priests in their temple duties. So if the priest was too busy help, surely one of the priest's helpers would tend to the injured man. But when the Levite passed on the other side, the head nodding became less notable. But they listened all the more, wondering who would be next. But that's what was next. Jesus says, "but," which of course means the twist is coming. The room grew even more quiet. But a Samaritan. And the people gasped. They gasped. Surely Jesus would never have a Samaritan in one of his stories. Samaritans were hated. They were despised. They were forced to live in their own land. Surely Jesus would never have one of them, even though they followed both the Torah, the books of the law. Their major argument was, Where was the right place to worship? Was the right place to worship in Jerusalem, at the temple church there, or was the right place to worship in Gerizim, where Bethel was located? The Israelites thought the Samaritans were heretics. But they were more than heretics. Samaritans, you see, were the descendants of Jacob. Jacob gone wrong, that is. So not only was it a religious feud, it was a blood feud. He drew a circle and shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. The rest of the story is really anticlimactic. The expected turn of the story turned in a way that none could imagine. The extravagance of the Samaritan's caregiving just added with unanticipated clarity to the crowd. They knew Jesus. They had heard his stories again and again. They knew there was one more question coming, because Jesus never stops where we want him to stop. He's always got one more point. He was going to make the lawyer do the unthinkable. He was going to force the lawyer to make his point for him. Which of the three? Which of the three is the injured man's neighbor? The lawyer is not even able to give voice to the word Samaritan. Could not even say the word. All he could muster is the one who showed mercy. And the crowd, I imagine the head nodding, had turned to head shaking. Yes, Jesus had stumped his questioner once again, but at what cost? Was he really saying that Samaritans are neighbors too? If that's what he's saying, then there is no one who is not a neighbor. Jesus had drawn the circle larger. Samaritans had always been drawn out of the circle, but Jesus drew the circle loud enough, far enough, wide enough to draw them in. If there is any one thing that the historic church has truly struggled with over the centuries, it is with drawing circles. Circles to keep some out, thus saving ourselves and our sanctity and our purity, or so we think. From the beginning, Jesus has not been who was expected. Born in a stable, exiled to Egypt, baptized by John in the River Jordan, tested by Satan in the desert, a teacher who dared to have empathy with the poor, saying, "Woe to you who are rich now." And what does he do next? He expands the reign of God. The reign which in his teaching and preaching he claims has come near. And he has expanded the circle to include Samaritans. And if Samaritans are included, then who can we possibly keep out? The answer, of course, is no one. No one is outside the circle of God's love. No one is denied. No one is denied admittance. Each and every one of us has a circle. Each one of us has a sphere of influence, a circle of people whose lives are directly impacted by our lives. For good or ill, our influence says something about us. And it says something about our church, too. What kind of people do we want to be? Are there people we want to exclude? Are there some that we have circled out? We may like to think that it's okay to keep some out, to keep some at arm's length or even further away. We may like to think that it's no one's business who we include or who we exclude. But that's not true. That is not true. A little historic evidence. In Hitler's circle, it began with Jews and gypsies and gays. In the lawyer's circle, it is Samaritans. But Jesus' circle includes all of us. And don't you think his church should too? He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had wit to win. We drew a circle. We drew a circle and took him in. That is the story of Jesus' love. Drawing circles that circle the world. I am grateful that I serve a church that is seeking more and more to be an inclusive community. We may not be there yet, but we are on that road, and I am grateful. Our hymn this morning is a hymn that expresses that very thing. It says, there's enough love for one like me. There's enough love for all of us. And finally, there's enough love for all the world. Will you stand with me as we sing?